Melbourne turns into a motorsport mecca this week as the Australian Grand Prix rolls into town. After the first 2 rounds in the Middle East, dominated by Red Bull in every sense of the word, the paddock is hoping for a reset. And with 2 Aussies taking to the track, it should be a festival of all things fever. I'm Jenny Gow, and this is 5 Live Formula One. Well, Melbourne is always an exciting race. As ever, I have my colleagues alongside me, Jolyon Palmer, former F1 driver, Beck Clancy, F1 journalist, and Harry Benjamin, 5 Live Formula One commentator. Harry, I love Australia. I love Albert Park. I love all things that happen this weekend.
Same. I really miss it being the first race of the year. It's nostalgic for me having Melbourne as the first race of the year, although it might well end up being that way from next season. We'll see. And if it's anything like last year, should be a cracker. It was absolutely bonkers last season in Australia. Three red flags, the most of any in a single race. The 2 Alpines in the wall at the end, collisions left, right, and centre. This year, Verstappen's probably going to win it, but let's look at what's going on behind.
Beck, what about the vibe of Australia?
Oh, well, we all love Melbourne, don't we? It's, we'll come to the racing, but let's talk about the coffee, the brunch, the jet lag. It's one of the best places to have jet lag because you just get up really early, go for a run along the beach in St Kilda. It's incredible. You walk over to the track, hundreds of thousands of people over the weekend. The atmosphere is amazing. If you've ever seen at Albert Park, it's just kind of between the city and the sea. And so you get these amazing views when you're inside the circuit. It's one of the best weekends. It's certainly one of the favourites of those who do the travelling circus. Yeah, it's really special. It's not normally a very good racetrack, though, is it? Last year was a bit of an anomaly. It's good that we've got these 4 DRS zones this year. That obviously helped. Well, bit of a question mark over what caused the crashes last year, I suppose. It's very, very high speed. Not good for Mercedes. I'm sure we'll come to that. But yeah, it's just a brilliant weekend all around. And we're racing on a Sunday or Saturday night, depending on how much of a night owl you are, given it's 4 a.m. here.
Exactly. One of my favourite memories of Albert Park was Jolyon Palmer on a tram. There are 7...
Oh, I think I said my debut.
Not on the tram.
Yeah, on the tram. Oh.
Did you know, this is my stat for the day, 1,700 tram stops. And Jolyon, we must have seen about 5 or 6 of those every day. Did you enjoy your tram experience?
It was a very efficient way to get to the circuit from the city. I'll give it that.
And it was nice to spend time with the fans.
It's nice to be amongst the fans. You can't beat a bit of public transport and just really mucking in. Yeah, sure. It's good.
In all seriousness, did you like racing at Albert Park?
I echo the sentiments from everyone else. It's brilliant. I love the city itself. Is just so vibrant, isn't it? And we always come at the end of our winter and we're a bit low in vitamin D. We haven't seen the sun for a long time. And then you get down to Melbourne, it's like, here we go. We've arrived. Now we've got obviously 2 races in the Middle East. So it's not quite, I think, as special as the season opener in Melbourne was, I would say. And as Harry alluded to, it looks like we're heading back there next year for the season opener, which will be brill. But yeah, love it. Picturesque circuit, really fast and flowing, fun to drive, and a really great crowd as well.
I've got food envy already just thinking of those brunches and all the drivers posting pictures of what they're having to eat at restaurants. All right, we'll talk about Mercedes, Ferrari and Carlos Sainz. Plus, we'll hear from the sensation of Saudi, Oliver Bearman, coming up. But first, Harry, as is usual for this season, we need an update on all things Red Bull.
So if you've been following the developments, which you can do on the BBC Sport website, we've had a week off really since Saudi Arabia. This is all to do with, of course, the accusations of inappropriate behaviour towards a female colleague by Christian Horner, which he has constantly denied, and the internal investigation by Red Bull dismissed that complaint. A lot has happened since then, and most recently, the complainant who accused Horner of that inappropriate behaviour has now registered a grievance with the FIA's Ethics Committee. Red Bull have said they were not aware of a complaint and are not going to make any more comments. The FIA has said inquiries and complaints are received and managed by the compliance officers and Ethics Committee. Both bodies work autonomously, so they'll be unable to confirm receipt of any complaint and unlikely to provide further comments. And that's about where we're at the moment.
Thanks, Harry. Let's turn to Beck. Are the FIA being transparent enough for you?
I mean, they're not an organisation known for being transparent, are they? Let's be honest. It's a really tricky one, isn't it? It feels like a lot of people in F1 are marking their own homework at the moment, if we can put it like that, which, quite frankly, never leads to transparency. I don't feel like anyone really gets the outcome they want. It's very murky, isn't it? It feels Red Bull have absolutely they have no responsibility in terms of making their report public. It was an internal, private matter. It wasn't criminal. There are no legal issues around it in that sense. So they don't have to make it public. However, how they've handled it has been so bad. Let's say it's been, Christian Horner obviously has denied all of the accusations. The woman at the centre of all of this, and this is what we have to remember, because there's lots of talk in the media about the power struggles going on within Red Bull and Red Bull Austria and Red Bull Thailand, and even, power plays within Christian Horner and Helmut Marko, the Red Bull senior development director. But there is a woman at the heart of this who made this complaint and who has said that she doesn't agree with the outcome from the Red Bull investigation, has decided to take it further, is appealing, has gone to the FIA. The FIA, who have actually pretty much said nothing throughout this. So no, it feels like one of the least transparent things that has gone on in F1.
I think there's a feeling from certainly the women that I've spoken to, whether they be fans or people in the paddock, who feels this is a really bad moment in F1 in general for females, Beck.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And going back to what I was saying, it was amazing how quickly it turned to this power struggle and this battle that was going on between the men within Red Bull, let's say. And she was almost completely written out of the story and forgotten that there was this grievance and that she did feel wronged, and that, I can't imagine it was easy for her to put in a complaint against the boss of Red Bull Racing, the team principal, who, as I've said, has denied the allegations. And she is so aggrieved by it. She is now taking this further. And it doesn't feel like a good moment for women in F1 because, obviously for legal reasons, we can't go into all of the detail, and we obviously know a lot more than we're able to report. But there are stories emerging when you talk to other women that don't sit comfortably, let's say, and it doesn't feel like the lack of transparency isn't great for F1 at the moment, is it? And women feel like they can't come forward because they're seeing what's happening at Red Bull. And okay, they've dismissed the grievance and they've said that they've brought in a KC who did a full investigation, hours and hours of speaking to everyone who needed, produced a 150-page report. Not that any of us have ever seen it. No one knows who the KC was. It sits very uncomfortably with all of the women I've spoken to as well, Jen, and women who feel like perhaps maybe they have had a couple of issues in the past, don't feel like they could ever raise anything because, well, it just gets swept under the carpet.
I mean, you spoke about the power balance and how the dialogue has shifted to that. But Jolyon, we have to look at what's happening in that power balance as well, and moving things on, looking at the Verstappen power that he seems to now have.
Well, I think the story is just incredibly complex, isn't it? Beck, you're right. Obviously, at the heart of it is the woman, and the investigation is still ongoing. Well, is going to be appealed, and the story will rumble on. But there is no doubt that there is this power struggle going on at Red Bull as well, linked or otherwise to the situation with Christian Horner. So a lot of it now centres around the Verstappens, and general chatter that Max might even leave Red Bull if he's not happy with the team and the outcome that they get to at some point this year, surely in the coming weeks or a month. So it's crazy to think that there's an option or a chance that Verstappen doesn't stay with Red Bull for next year. He is wiping the floor with everyone. The team is set up to dominate next year as well with him. They're too far ahead of the pack. The rules aren't going to change drastically at all. But yet there is this power dynamic, for want of another word, between your top driver and the senior management and different members of the senior management. And it is a chaotic story to look at from the outside at everything that's going on at Red Bull. Obviously, the heart of it is this very serious investigation, allegations. But what's coming on around the outside of it, the peripheral, is significant from a sporting point of view as well.
Jolyon, can I ask you a question? When you're inside a team and when this is all going on, And there's been a lot of chatter about how, this is all happening around the fringes, the senior, it's not, everyone else, the mechanics, engineers are getting on with their job. But when you're inside a team, how aware are you of what's actually happening around and the news stories? And I know there was obviously when your time at Renault, there wasn't a big story like this, but how aware are you and your team and the engineers and mechanics of stuff like this, and what kind of impact would it have?
Oh, you're completely aware. This is to be honest, there's not a huge amount of stories happening on the track. Red Bull are too far ahead of the field. So in Bahrain, for example, the first race, so much of the chat was about what's going on at Red Bull, and that was a significant part of it. All the media center were deep into everything that was going on. Everyone knows that that's the story. And if you're a team member, you're a mechanic, you're a driver, you cannot help but look at the headlines and see what's going on in your team. Some people will know more than what's going on. Some people will know less or they'll be just reading like we are what's reported at times as well. But in the end also, does it make a difference? It doesn't need to. If everyone's just doing their job, they've got the best driver at the moment, they have the best car. In harmony, they're working incredibly well. The driver with the mechanics, with the engineers, none of them are involved at the center of this. And from where they are at now, for the rest of this year, they don't really need the senior management to call the strategy on the pit wall, to change the tyres, to tell Max how to drive the car. They have all the tools available to them to go on and win. And that's all they've got to focus on right now as a sport for Verstappen, for the team members.
Well, Harry, so far, Red Bull and Max Verstappen have been faultless. They've dropped only 1 point, and that was fastest lap last time out, with Leclerc picking that up. How impressed do you think you are with what they are delivering on track, regardless of what's happening off track?
Yeah, it clearly doesn't seem to have any kind of effect with what's going on the track. As we said, the dominance continues and steps up a level. I feel like you almost have to say at the top of any podcast, any analysis that we do from here on out for the rest of this season is just acknowledging how great Verstappen and Red Bull have been. You can produce the best car. You can be the driver with the most talent, but there are still things that might go against you. There is still the potential to be caught up in some kind of collision, or conditions might go against you, but somehow that never seems to come Max Verstappen's way. And so far this year, especially with Sergio Perez coming and delivering in second place each time, 2-1-2 finishes off the bat to kickstart the season, you have to take your hat off and go, well, sport, whatever it is, rewards the people and the teams that are the best at it. And they are the best. And that's where it's at the moment. And now it's up to everybody else to catch up. But Verstappen and Red Bull continue their dominance, and it's formidable to see.
It's difficult to see a world where they're not already champions for this year. They've got the march on everyone. And the thing is with Max, like you said, Harry, there are things in a Grand Prix that it's 90 minutes on average, a Grand Prix. If sometimes you get more chaotic ones, you have red flags like we had in Melbourne last year. You have a 1-2 lap shootout. You think this is a chance for someone to just get a better start than Max and win the race. But they don't. Max takes the lead at the start and carries on winning. There's Zandvoort, where it's absolutely hosing it down, and they're driving around on slicks in the wet. And then there's again a late restart on Inters. Fernando Alonso second, and still Max goes on to win. There's Monaco, similar situation. Slicks in the wet on Monaco, still he goes on to win. Bad pit stops occasionally happen to Red Bull, but generally they are actually the best team in the pits as well. The strategies are pretty much on point. The car's not broken down for 2 years in a race. His last retirement from a race was Melbourne 2022. And that left him quite a long way away from Charles Leclerc at the top of the points. I think it was about 43 points he was down. Since then, the run has been relentless. So you can't even bank on the fact that the rivals might think he might break down at some point. It's not happened for 2 years. This run of dominance is actually incredible for the team and driver to put this together, but it is making them an absolute monster to beat.
Always happy to have you along for the ride, Jolyon. Bring us all down.
Well, I'm bringing it up. We're witnessing greatness, Jenny.
I know, and we should embrace that. And I do feel that when I watch Max on track, you know that you're watching someone extremely talented, extremely special.
So this is greatness. Okay, this is maybe one of the best drivers that we will ever see at the wheel, and that's what's going on right now. He's on 3 championships, will be 4. he could eclipse all the records by the end of, and we are witnessing that right now. The thing is what I find is it's difficult to appreciate the skill level that's going on, because he starts on pole. The qualifying laps are always good. He's putting Perez in the shade. He starts on pole and then he just saunters off into the distance. The skill level to do that is better than anyone else has got right now. He is making it look so easy, but he makes it look easy. And that's the thing where you can't witness, how sideways there's amazing car control until it rains and he's on slick tires. And then you get some magic moments sort of 2 or 3 times a year. But he's making it generally look effortless as well. It's difficult for him to showcase the greatness, if you know what I mean.
You have to look at his teammate, don't you? Perez can't get anywhere near him driving the same car.
You look at the stats, but the qualifying laps all look pinpoint. There's no heroics here or there. They are very good laps, but it's sort of the stats that show the greatness rather than every weekend or every session seeing. Lionel Messi, you can watch and you can see, your mind boggles at what he can do. Roger Federer, Novak Djokovic, Nadal, the same sort of thing. Same with golfers. With Max at the moment in Formula One, occasionally you see something and you're like, that was magical. But often it's just relentless and it's just so good. And it's 1/10, 2/10, which is almost nothing. It's imperceptible to us around a 1:30 lap. But it's the consistency of Max as much as anything that's just destroying everyone.
It feels like he's getting better. Like this could almost be more of a dominant year for him than last year.
Yeah.
But it's brilliant. It is. There's no taking away from that, but it's boring. It just is. And ultimately, the one maybe caveat hope for the general viewer, the general listener, is that, this is not a new thing in Formula One. There has been dominance. Yes, this seems like it's a level above what we've seen in the past, but you do get these cycles in Formula One, but they come and they go. It was Hamilton, it was Vettel, it was Schumacher, etc. It will change, and in any regulation cycle, it will tighten up. But for the time being, yeah, you do have to applaud, but I think it's okay to say it's boring as well.
This too shall pass.
Wow. Can I get that tattooed with Jolyon Palmer underneath?
Palmer's words of wisdom.
Well, I mean, it could be next year. Maybe he's off to Mercedes. If you swap Verstappen into Mercedes and you put an Alex Albon into a Red Bull, it could be a magical year next year.
Well, Albon becomes champion and Max Verstappen. I mean, even in a Mercedes, Max Verstappen's not driving that thing to a championship, is he?
But is Albon much better than Perez?
Yes.
But they didn't show it against Max, though, did they?
Well, but it's that old adage, isn't it? Being Fernando Alonso's teammate, Lewis Hamilton's teammate, Max Verstappen's teammate. When you're up against the best, you're always going to come second.
But I'm saying they were second by a similar margin, Perez and Albon.
Oh, I see what you mean.
So
right.
If you put Perez with Albon, and they're both missing the same to Max,
Ferrari are winning.
You've suddenly put maybe the best driver in the second best car. Could be very close.
Clip that up.
It's
That's
not
the tease.
implausible for next year right now.
Let's talk about Ferrari then. Move the subject along. Latest on Carlos Sainz, please, Harry.
Well, he had his appendix surgery across the weekend of the Saudi weekend. He was back in the paddock for race day, sort of walking rather gingerly, I think it's fair to say, into the paddock. And he is in Australia. He is there. He's been seen cycling around on the track. And I believe Ferrari have said that it is their absolute ambition to have him in the car for the weekend. It will be a case of get him in for FP1 and see how he is. Can he perform? But look, Alex Albon had the exact same surgery and the exact same time in between races, a couple of years ago now, when he missed the Italian Grand Prix, which saw Nick de Vries debut. And he made it back and was fine for the next race, which was Singapore, I think. And so I would suspect that Sainz will be fine for this weekend, but that will be an evolving story. Oliver Behrman is there racing in Formula 2 in Melbourne this weekend, so he is and will be on standby.
Palmer, what's it like to be in that situation where Oliver Behrman has had that one race and now he's back on the sidelines?
Well, he's racing Formula 2, so he's going to go back to the Formula 2 paddock as a bit of a king, isn't he? Having raced in Formula 1 and claimed the world's sports headlines for a week, and then he'll go back to the relative anonymity of Formula 2 for the weekend. But he can't rest on his laurels there, and he did an amazing job. He may well have got himself a contract already for next year, not with Ferrari, but with potentially Haas or someone else. But he's got to go back and show that level of talent again in Formula 2. If I were him, I'd be certainly preparing for Formula 2 and don't even think that there might be a chance that Sainz doesn't race again, because I think most likely he will. If Albon could come back in Singapore, that's as physical as you get and as long as you get. Melbourne's not nearly so physical and tough. So would fully expect Sainz to be back. Behrman should do the same. And he was due to start on pole in Jeddah in Formula 2 as well. So go and show that sort of form again. And if he wins Formula 2 or really shows the talent that he's actually got a tough job to win Formula 2 from where he's at now. But if he shows the talent that we saw last week in a Formula 2 car the rest of the year, then it is a certainty he'll be on the grid next year.
Well, following his impressive debut in Saudi Arabia, Oliver Behrman took on his next challenge of sitting down with the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson.
All right, Ollie, thanks for joining us. I wanted to ask you about your Formula One debut, obviously. Looking back on it now, how are you feeling about it?
First of all, feeling a lot better physically. Those couple of days after the race were pretty difficult. But it was worth it. It was such a great experience, and I loved every moment. Of course, looking back, I have some regrets and opportunities that I missed, but I can't be too harsh on myself, considering it was the first race.
Well, exactly. And you got thrown in really at the 11th hour, didn't you? You'd never driven the car before. It was, 2 hours before the final practice session. The pressure's on in that situation. What's your mindset? How do you cope with that?
Yeah, honestly, because of the timings of everything, I almost didn't have time to get nervous, which was a good thing. We were straight away checking the seat, checking the fitment of the car, doing the FIA tests to make sure I could actually drive, and preparing technically about the track and about all the procedures, of which there are many in F1. So I was so busy in the hours leading up to FP3 that I literally didn't have time to get nervous. I think if I knew from the night before, I would have struggled a bit more. So I was happy that I had it this way.
Was there any point where you felt, the pressure was getting to you a little bit? I mean, you mentioned, for example, you weren't happy with some things. I'm guessing getting out of Q2 or not getting out of Q2 was one of the things that you weren't happy with, being a perfectionist.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Q2 was a big regret of mine. First of all, with the red flag at the start of the session, so I didn't have a lap on the board. And, being my first rodeo, let's say, to not have completed that lap hurt me a little bit mentally. At the time, I tried to block it out, but for sure it wasn't positive. And then a small mistake on my final run on lap 1 meant that I needed to go for it on lap 2, which is never a great feeling. I knew I had to give everything, and of course in that moment there is a risk to overdo it. So I was kind of balancing that as well. So yeah, I don't think the pressure really got to me, but it was just a bit of a scruffy session with everything that happened. And of course, I really regret that I wasn't able to get into Q3 because the car was fast enough and I should have been there.
And what about the race itself? What were you thinking when you were going into that?
Going into the race, I was actually less nervous. Qualifying was, for me, the most nervous part, also because I had only done one lap on a soft tyre. So going into qualifying, I was pretty nervous. The race, on the other hand, except lap 1, where, you're not sure, especially starting in the midfield, you're not sure what can happen, and it's sometimes tough to avoid incidents. But actually, I was really looking forward to getting into the race and having consecutive laps to build up my knowledge, because at the start of the race, my knowledge was increasing by 50% almost every lap. So I was looking forward to getting into the race and was much less nervous. And I feel like the race went well. I was learning every lap, and, my fastest version of myself was right at the end, which makes sense given the circumstances. My only regret or kind of bad decision or bad execution was with my overtakes, where I took a bit longer than necessary to overtake the guys ahead, which lost me a bit of lap time. So that's the only thing. But again, it was my first time using the battery strategy, which is quite complex compared to what I'm used to.
You sound like you're being pretty tough on yourself. What did the team boss, Fred Vasseur, say to you afterwards?
I think Fred didn't have the highest expectations of me, considering the difficulty of the situation, and he made it clear that there were no expectations. He didn't put any pressure on me, which helped me to kind of thrive and maximize it. I think to start, Fred was happy that I finished the race because it was a really demanding one. And he doesn't let on much, but I'm sure he was pleased.
So you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the interview that you found it quite tough physically. I heard that Lewis Hamilton even had to help you out of the car afterwards, or at least did help you out of the car. Can you explain why it was so tough and what was going on in that situation when he came over?
I think people misunderstood when I said that. It was just a joking comment, but he came to congratulate me. I was already out of the car. It wasn't that tough.
Okay.
But I joked that he was pulling me out of the car because I struggled. But no, it was a difficult race, especially at the end. You know, I had these two quick guys bearing down on me, and I had to really go for it and not leave anything on the table. And actually, when I was driving, I didn't really feel too tired. But it's when the adrenaline wears off after the flag. And especially when you get out of the car and there's no more fresh air coming to you, because obviously I'm not driving anymore. That's when I felt the heat, and I needed to get my helmet off quite quickly to cool me down.
Now, after the race, it was quite notable that Max Verstappen, Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, and Charles Leclerc, your teammate, all talked about what a great job you'd done. How does it feel for an 18-year-old to be getting compliments from people like that?
Yeah, especially from the older guys, you know, like Fernando, like Lewis. I grew up as a kid watching them on track, and to share the track with them, first of all, even if I wasn't really racing against them, it was an honor. And yeah, for them to say these kind words about me was really nice and really fulfilling. So it was a proud moment, proud day for me.
Now, you're the youngest British driver ever in Formula One, as obviously everyone's been telling you. And your teammate next year is going to be the most successful, or at least you'll still be part of Ferrari, presumably, at that point. How do you feel about the prospect of working with Lewis Hamilton, and what kind of inspiration has he been for you in your earlier career?
Yeah, although I won't be working directly with him, I'm sure his knowledge and experience will rub off in all departments. You know, I'm doing a lot of sim work with them. So hopefully I can learn a thing or two from him and his wealth of experience. It's a real honor to have him, or you know, even be associated with him in the same team, and hopefully he can push everyone forward and bring great success.
Now, you've been a member of the Ferrari Driver Academy for a couple of years or so now, but apparently you've been living in Italy since you were 15 or 16, is that right? And what's that been like? Have you been on your own? Have your parents been with you? Do you speak Italian? What's that like for a sort of English teenager going to live in Italy? Yeah,
at the start it was difficult. You know, I joined FDA at 15 or 16, around that time. I think I was actually 15. It was my first year of F3, so yeah, I was pretty young, and I think I was 16 maybe. Anyway, both pretty small numbers. So yeah, it was tough at first. You know, it was like moving to university a couple of years early, and home wasn't as close as your average university student. So it was difficult. I did miss my family a lot, and I, at the time, tried to come back home as often as possible, you know, on the weekends to spend time with them. And, you know, the thing is, there's a lot of us the same age here in the academy, which meant the weekdays we would always go out for dinner and have fun, but I did miss my family very much. But now I've kind of changed my role. I'm very busy on the simulator. I have a bit more freedom. Now I have my driving license, so I don't mind staying here a bit more often. And you know, I see my parents at the race weekends, and sometimes I come home, but much less often than in the beginning.
Sure. Now, everybody in Formula One is talking about it being inevitable that you're going to be in Formula One next year after your performance in Saudi Arabia. Have Ferrari said anything to you? Have they set you any targets? What are the next steps for you?
I mean, the thing is, you're only as good as your last race. So I think in a week's time, 2 weeks' time, all of this will be forgotten, and I'll be judged on my previous F2 race. So that, of course, is my main focus. I need to do a great rest of the year in F2. I'm currently last, having missed the race weekend in Jeddah. So got some work to do to catch up. But yeah, that's my main focus. I want to do as good as I can in the F2 Championship and see where we are at the end of that.
But I'm assuming after this, it's F1 next year is definitely what you're aiming for, and that'll be what you expect to happen, right?
I do hope so. In the end, it all depends on my performance. So I have to nail down race by race and do as well as I can, and hopefully that will be enough.
All right, Ollie, thanks very much for your time indeed.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
He's an impressive young man, and to me, he has the He sounds a little bit like Charles Leclerc when he was Behrman's age. Beck, what did you make of his race, and secondly, what he had to say there?
He was extremely impressive, wasn't he? It was hardly a surprise, as Andrew touched on there, that all of the big name drivers came over and congratulated him. Yeah, I mean, he's really put his name forward for a seat in F1 next year. Jolyon touched on it a bit earlier. He is now being linked with a driver at Haas, which I think would be great, because it's always a bit of a shame when you have a season like this where we started with the same drivers that we ended with. It doesn't happen very often, if ever. And I think what's really important is that this ladder that F1 have tried to create, bring young drivers through, at the moment it feels very much like F2 is the stopping point and there's nowhere for them to go. And so it's great that, unfortunate obviously for Carlos Sainz needing the surgery, but it was great that Oliver Behrman got this showing, because it feels a bit in recent years like it's too easy to forget about these great F2 drivers. And I know obviously we'll come to Mercedes, but a lot of talk about Antonelli perhaps replacing Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes, another great young driver. But I think it's really important that people like Behrman, they get to show off their talent, they get to stand in. Perhaps there should be, I don't know how you do it, obviously you can't take out drivers as a championship at play, but it would be great to see him get into an F1 seat next year. There are other very good drivers within F2 as well, Antonelli has mentioned. As Jolyon also said, he was on pole in Saudi. He does have talent. He has proven himself in the lower categories. So he is definitely one to watch.
I couldn't agree more with Bex. It certainly seems like when you get to the top of F2, if you win it or if you do well, that's almost as far as you can take it over the last few years. The last couple of champions haven't made it to the grid. Felipe Drugovich has had to be on the sidelines as reserve for Aston Martin, and now he's gone off to do sports cars this year. Théo Pourchaire as well. He's had to go and spend a year in Japan doing Super Formula. He's part of the Sauber Academy and as their reserve. And then you also look at, everyone seems to have forgotten about Fred Vesti as well, who did such a good job last year, finished runner-up in Formula 2, is the reserve for Mercedes, but he's not being talked about for that second seat that's available with Mercedes. Instead, everyone's talking about, as Beck said, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, who's actually 10th in the F2 standings, just to sort of highlight how bizarre the start of the F2 season is. You've got Antonelli, which seems to be the talk of the town, who's down in 10th. Behrman, who is last. We all know why. But at the top of the championship is a guy called Zane Maloney, who is a Sauber reserve from Barbados, and he's putting himself now into the frame for a seat. But for years, there haven't been those opportunities. And I think if you do well in F2, you do deserve a shot. 13 contracts are up for grabs at the end of this season. The likes of a Logan Sargent, Zhou Guanyu, Valtteri Bottas, Kevin Magnussen, I think are all very much at risk of falling out of Formula One at the end of this season. There are other moves to be made as well. But this is the first time in a while where I think we could get a real potential influx of some fresh young drivers.
I think full credit should go to Ferrari and Fred Vasseur for actually just putting him in. He's 18, the youngest Brit to race in Formula One, one of the youngest drivers to ever race in Formula One, mid-weekend, and is in a Ferrari. That would never normally happen for Ferrari. They'd normally have an experienced pair of hands that can come in, or they'd go and poach someone from further down the grid. But I love the fact that Ferrari just thought, you know what, he's our young gun. Let's just see if he sinks or swims. It's understandable, as Ollie said, that Fred would have low expectation, because anything was a bonus, really, when you're chucking an 18-year-old in for 1 hour of practice on a tricky circuit, and then he's doing that job. You're not really expecting anything more than maybe a scrabble around for a point here or there. So I think that's part of the reason why everyone was so hyped by him. But I think we're overlooking the fact that Ferrari gave him that shot. No big teams are doing that, not just Ferrari, but Mercedes. When Hamilton was out, they went to George Russell, who was on their books, but they could have taken out someone else. That gave Jack Aitken the chance at Williams. And the same with Red Bull. You're not getting many times the chance of someone coming from outside of Formula One to jump straight into a winning car. And then secondly, I love the fact that Behrman showed that it was a worthwhile choice for Ferrari to do. And he's repaid them. And there's a big myth that's gone around the last couple of years that Formula One is too tough for rookies. But you look at some drivers, and you look at Behrman in Jeddah, tricky circuit, did well. Liam Lawson last year came in, did brilliantly. Oscar Piastri, let's not forget, was a rookie last year, did amazingly well, won a sprint race. So if you have the talent, you can make the step up. And I think there's too many teams have been too uninspiring with their driver choices, particularly for this year when there's been no changes at all. And you've got 2 Formula 2 champions on the bench. There is talent out there, but they've just stuck with what they know. And I love that some youngsters can get in and prove them wrong, really.
So do you think, Jolyon, that when you say that about some teams, I particularly think of Haas straight away and go, they tried the rookie route, didn't they, with Schumacher and Mazepin for a couple of years, and think it's fair to say that didn't quite work out for them, and they actively went back to experience. Kevin Magnussen brought back Nico Hülkenberg, but I think they've performed okay. But do you think that was a moment now they think, should we put in a Behrman alongside? Which one do you get rid of? Because Magnussen and Hülkenberg, they're decent peddlers. Do they deserve to lose their drives?
But it's also choosing which rookie. It's not like, there are some rookies that do struggle. Logan Sargent's had a tough time in Formula One.
Yeah.
Did we expect him to thrive and be amazing? Probably not, because what was he, 4th in Formula 2 in the end? Just got the super license points to make it onto the grid. Zhou. Did we expect Zhou to be a superstar rookie? No, he's actually done more than the expectation was on him, and he's done solidly to establish himself in Formula One. Probably the same with Yuki Tsunoda. There are a few of the drivers that haven't come through with the panache of others, and they've not won Formula 2. Schumacher did, and I think Schumacher was actually pretty solid. He was running neck and neck with Kevin Magnussen and is better than he is remembered. But obviously Nikita Mazepin's not going to be a great choice. Again, he was nowhere in Formula 2. So it's about choosing the right rookie. And if you win the Formula 2 championship, Zhou was 3rd after 3 seasons. Théo Pourchaire's on the bench now, won it after 3 seasons.
That's the biggest problem.
Exactly. There are drivers with better pedigree who you think would come in and do a very good job. And it's not to be harsh on Zhou. He's been absolutely solid. But I find some of the team's choices uninspiring compared to having the right rookie in the car and not just a rookie.
Uninspiring, but bringing a lot of financial clout with them. But you mentioned Yuki Tsunoda there, Jolyon. I mean, isn't this the entire point of bank card, ATM machine, whatever we're calling them now, the juniors? They are supposed to be bringing through the juniors, and yet they've got Tsunoda, they've got Daniel Ricciardo, who I'm sure we'll come on to talk about more, who isn't performing great, hasn't performed great since McLaren, let's go all the way back there. And they've got great driver, Liam Lawson sitting on the sidelines. Why aren't they doing more to bring through young drivers when that was supposed to be the whole raison d'etre of that team?
Yeah, I think also some credit to Tsunoda, who's actually doing a good job now. He's getting more established and beating Ricciardo, who was sort of brought in to give Tsunoda the hurry up and maybe get back into the Red Bull. That isn't looking like it's going to happen right now unless Ricciardo has a big upturn in form. But yeah, Red Bull, historically, they're not here to produce Yuki Tsunodas. They're here to produce Sebastian Vettel's, Max Verstappen's, Daniel Ricciardo, in his first guise when he came in and became a multiple Grand Prix winner. So even whilst Tsunoda is becoming solid, Red Bull, he's not the finished article that a top team like Red Bull are really after. And Liam Lawson came in and he showed quite a lot last year, didn't he?
But why not give him the drive? I mean, they announced their driver lineup for this year while Liam Lawson was still in his race suit.
They did it too early, didn't they? I think it was all with the lure of bringing Ricciardo back and then giving him enough time to prove himself rather than because he broke his wrist, and that gave Lawson the chance to jump in and actually show that he can do kind of as well as Daniel, to be honest, and he was a rookie. So I think they jumped in too soon with Ricciardo, and maybe he can go on a great run and show Red Bull why they brought him back for the rest of this year. There's so many races left, but Lawson will be on the grid next year. But again, they just locked them in too soon, and there are just good rookies they could have had.
Jolyon, you say Lawson will be on the grid next year. We talk about Oliver Behrman being on the grid next year. Do you actually think that there are enough places for all of these exciting young drivers to come into? Because there's a lot of drivers that are sticking around in a Formula One for probably past their sell-by date.
Next year will be the biggest shake-up we've had in decades, maybe ever. This could be the biggest shake-up ever. We've already got it at the top
for you
teams.
Then?
Look, I'm going to rule myself out at this stage.
Don't go too early.
I'm glad you've said that on the record.
Another FTU champion on the grid.
Yeah. No, I think I'm going to rule myself out. I'm not going to, muddy the waters of all the team's decisions, thinking that I could be on the table for them still. But we've already got Hamilton goes to Ferrari. So you've got a new Ferrari lineup, which is unbelievably exciting, Hamilton and Leclerc, which means a new Mercedes lineup. Who's going to partner Russell? That will be exciting, whether it's Antonelli, whether it's Alonso, whether it's Verstappen. You know, Red Bull, they're quite likely to change their own lineup unless Perez can keep a really strong form. And then there's all this outwash to the rest of the field. Alpine will change their lineup. Haas will change their lineup. Sauber will change their lineup, certainly. Williams will probably change their lineup. RB, they're going to change their lineup. No one's going to be the same next year. Maybe McLaren are the only ones.
Well, you can never say never in this business. You don't know. I know both Lando Norris signed what a contract extension, didn't he, in the winter? But we all know what contracts are worth in Formula One. But exactly, there are so many extenuating circumstances. You alluded to that. If Verstappen does go, that changes everything. Where does he go? Do Red Bull keep Perez? Do they have a whole new driver slate? Does then Perez have to stay in that team and be the leader? But then you also have other news stories in the last week where Audi, who are coming into Formula One in 2026, are now taking 100% over Sauber. That suddenly brings a bit more of an appeal as a seat for perhaps a higher tiered driver, because before Sauber still would have had, I think it was about a 25% ownership of that team when Audi coming in 2026. And based on the current performances of Sauber, they're not going to be attracting the high caliber drivers that are on the market. You look at your Alonsos, etc., maybe even your Carlos Sainz's. But now I think they've dangled a real carrot with 100% ownership. They are going to be a factory team. They are going to supply their own power units as well. That could be a real muddying of the waters too. So there's so much to play out here throughout the rest of the year. And we've only had 2 races.
The timing is so crucial for your Perez, for example. He might do the same job, and whether Verstappen leaves Red Bull or stays will change whether he stays or leaves. For everyone up and down the field and everyone outside of the field, the timing of what's going on with other drivers' contracts, outside influences, external factors, can make or break a career.
I think it's really interesting. I think there's a potential that all 10 teams have a different driver lineup next year, because I don't think Red Bull will stick with Perez. They are currently apparently eyeing up Piastri. And as Harry's already said, contracts mean absolutely nothing in this sport. They are a complete waste of time unless you're on the receiving end of the income, I suppose. But Audi, I find a really, really interesting story, because they aren't currently under the restrictions of the budget cap. They have a percentage stake, so as it is in Sauber, they will be coming as 100%. But they, at the moment, are throwing money at their F1 project. And we know that they're currently talking to Carlos Sainz, that we know that they want him. I wouldn't be surprised if they arrived on the grid in 2026 and were immediately on the podium.
Wow. Really? That is a bold claim.
Well, they're a serious outfit with serious money. They are spending far more than anyone else on the grid at the moment because they can. You know, if they can get a good driver like Carlos Sainz in early doors, which is what they're looking for, then they'll have great feedback. You get them on the sim, you know, they are a serious outfit. So I think they could really attract someone big. And Fernando Alonso doesn't want to go anywhere either.
Bex, do you think because Audi have upped their involvement all of a sudden and taking fully over Sauber, do you think that was maybe done with the interest of trying to sort of tip Sainz across the edge in making a move to Audi? Because it seems like he might have been a bit on the fence going there in the first place.
No, I'm not sure he was worried too much on that side. They've got Andreas Seidl in place, who obviously used to be at McLaren, and Seidl and Sainz got on very, very well from the days that Sainz was at McLaren. From what I understand, Seidl was actually very supportive of Sainz. So they have a very good relationship already. And I think that's one of the key factors in bringing him across, just as, you know, team principals are crucial. For Sir was the architect in bringing Lewis Hamilton over to Ferrari, for example. You know, those relationships, they really, really matter.
Yeah, Seidl is the CEO of that whole Audi movement at the moment, and he will remain in that position through to 2026. So when you say you don't think they will have the clout to bring in big names, Andreas Seidl can bring in the big names. I think he has the pedigree to do that and has that performance. Let me move things on to Mercedes. They're fourth in the Constructors' Championship. Hamilton not having the best start so far, Harry. Just tell us what he's done so far. Only 2 races in, obviously.
Qualified 9th in Bahrain, finished 7th compared to teammate Russell, who qualified 3rd, finished 5th. And then in Saudi Arabia, Hamilton qualified 8th and finished 9th compared to his teammate George Russell, who qualified 7th and finished 6th. So not the best start for Lewis Hamilton, but there are bigger issues at play here with Mercedes and struggling to understand some issues with their car. Despite having this seeming optimism since the beginning of the year, they have made a step up for sure since last year. But the main issue, and perhaps this is affecting Hamilton more so than Russell, is that they're struggling for pace in high-speed corners. And there's even rumor about maybe there's some possible simulator correlation problems because what they're seeing in the sim is not happening out on track. I have heard that perhaps this weekend they might be trying to bring in an old new floor, basically the floor they used in testing for Bahrain. They then made some changes for the first race. While those brought some good side effects, they might have brought some negatives as well. So they might be trying that out this weekend to see if that causes any issues, because Melbourne, there's a lot of high-speed corners around that track, and it's bringing this porpoising, this bouncing once again to the Mercedes. And that is the sort of crux of the issue that they're having at the moment. And Hamilton just seems to be getting the rougher ride at the moment.
So this is a third year that Mercedes seem to be a bit lost. Is that fair to say, Beck? And would you expect a team like Mercedes, who had the most amount of constructor wins of all time, to be in that place at the moment?
Possibly not 3 years in a row. It's surprising how, when Harry says they don't understand the car, it's such deja vu, isn't it? I mean, how many more times can we hear them say this? And it's not even from weekend to weekend. Sometimes it feels like it's from day to day, Friday to Sunday. They've just got no idea what's going on. They have admitted already that they basically can't do high speed, which is really unfortunate going to Albert Park, where I think 72% of the lap is at full throttle. So they're going to struggle here again this weekend. But, as Harry said, they're trialling parts or trialling old parts. They've got James Allison back at the fore as the technical director. He obviously stepped away. Mike Elliott came up with the no side pod design. They scrapped the no side pod design when it didn't work, along with Mike Elliott, who left. James Allison is back at the front, who is kind of the Mercedes Adrian Newey, let's say. But he doesn't seem to have quite got a grip on this car either. I mean, he started with a dog and he's trying to turn it into something. There's not much you can do. As I said, there is a budget cap now, so there's development is really tricky, and they are just so far behind. It's been said before, but 20 cars on the grid, 18 of them look like last year's Red Bull, and Red Bull have now improved their design and looks like a different car, and everyone's just chasing their tail, and no one more so than Mercedes, it feels like.
Jolien, do you see any sort of a reflection of the team who was so successful with Lewis Hamilton 4 years ago?
It's amazing how quickly it feels like a different era, doesn't it? The Hamilton-Mercedes dominance, Hamilton and Bottas, the team in perfect harmony, much like Red Bull are now. I'm a little bit concerned for them because this was meant to be the year of hope for Mercedes. They finally got away from the zero pod concept that didn't work, that they had for 2 years, really. Even if they changed it halfway through last year, they were stuck with the chassis design. They made some big changes over the winter. They had a blank canvas to go from, and they were quite happy with where they were at in terms of a starting point. But everyone's got better, and Mercedes have developed other issues. So the porpoising seems to be particularly bad on that car again, which was their nemesis in 2022. And the bigger thing in all of this as well is that Hamilton's going at the end of the year. So the team are a little bit lost in car design, and they're losing probably their biggest asset in Lewis Hamilton, and you've got to replace him with what's going to be an inferior replacement. Whoever it's going to be is a tricky one. And if you suddenly lose a star driver, okay, Lewis has had a couple of tricky races to start the year, but he never starts the year particularly strongly. Last year, I think, showed that he's still got it. And you've got a team that's a little bit chasing their tail. They will find pace again. They will have some strong results this year, and I'm sure they'll still be dreaming of a win. But then this is not the all singing, all dancing move towards Red Bull that they hoped.
Yeah, quite what's going to happen this year, we'll wait to see. We have to talk. We spoke a little bit, didn't we, about Daniel Ricciardo and his lack of form. We need to talk about the home heroes because it is exciting for Australia. I know the fans will be out along the whole of the parade waiting to get their signatures and autographs and selfies from Oscar Piastri and Daniel Ricciardo. But Australians haven't had a good track record at this track or the Australian Grand Prix in general, have they, Harry?
Traditionally, no. And I mean, even the recent past, one thing that springs to memory is Ricciardo in the Renault on the run down to turn one, as soon as the lights go out, got too far towards the grassy verge by the pit wall and took out his front wing, and his race was over before he'd even reached turn one. So yes, not great luck for them. But Piastri had a decent run last year with that chaotic race. He managed to keep it neat and tidy and finish in the points and survive, which was the main point of Melbourne last year. But I don't think we can really read into past Australian performances. I think Piastri will do well. I think he'll do quite well, actually. Ricciardo has a lot to prove from this moment on. He says this is really the start of his season, all kicking off, firing on all cylinders. Let's see if it happens.
Watch out for Piastri this weekend. McLaren are going to be strong here. This is a circuit that suits their car so much better than the last two tracks. And Piastri coming back to these sort of racetracks that he didn't know last year. Home crowd, bit of a bounce maybe from then, even if they've been unlucky in the past. It's always nice going to a home race, I think. So I'm fully expecting Piastri to be competitive. Obviously not with Verstappen, but with the rest, and aiming to be that Aussie on the podium, I think.
Well, he finished fourth in Saudi, didn't he? And as you say, this track is great for the McLaren. Piastri, I've been so impressed with him since, well, the whole of last season and now again this year. I would not be surprised to see him on the podium at all this weekend. And as you said, Jen, walking up the parade for the drivers as the fans are all there, there's something so special about this weekend. The numbers, the atmosphere, the weather. It's just an amazing weekend, and Piastri will no doubt be. He's not the most outgoing driver. He's definitely not Daniel Ricciardo. He is a bit shy, let's say, but you can't help but soak it all in, absorb it, and it must have an effect, right? Jolyn, when you were at the British Grand Prix, did it have an effect on you?
Oh, the Australian Grand Prix had an effect on me. Yeah. When you walk in and there's the Walk of Champions or whatever it was, when you walk in and the crowd are all lining, it's a great entrance for all the drivers at the Australian Grand Prix, let alone if you're an Aussie. And yeah, the British Grand Prix for me is such a boost. You get a huge amount of support, and it will be the same for Piastri and Daniel Ricciardo as the Aussies on the grid now. Piastri's just so unfazed by everything, isn't he? He can win a sprint. He can start right on the front, and he's like, oh, cool, nice one, guys. And you can't imagine him being really G'd up by anything particularly, but it will certainly put a smile on his face.
We're all forgetting about the third Australian on the grids, Valtteri Bottas, of course.
Honorary Australian.
The honorary Australian. Not had a great year. He's currently 20th in the drivers' standings, but he's been doing some great off-track activities, Jen, so that might well spur him on for the weekend ahead.
It's like you read my mind, Harry. I was going to mention the Bottas adverts. He's done it. It's absolutely amazing. If you haven't watched it, go onto social media. You're missing out. But I retweeted it this morning, and the replies that I got were amazing. Chris King, for example, says, "This is quite literally the best thing an F1 driver has ever done. And this is not me sludging the F1 driver's back catalogue of stuff." People equating it to being better than the Pizza Hut advert, which is going some way. But Bottas has found himself, it feels like. And it's a bold himself, but he's moving and being part of Sauber has enabled him to bring out his personality, Jolyon.
Yeah, he's lost his performance, but his personality is great right now. It's great to see a funny. It's a good vid, isn't it? It's a great promotion.
Would you have done that? Would you have done it?
Yeah, because I'm, the easygoing, light-hearted guy that I've always been. Obviously, I'd say yes to any.
And you really suit
like
a mullet, Jolyon.
Yeah. Did you do any ads? Did you have to do any, apart from that sort of alert on a street track one that you got put on the billboard for? Anything
that
else in your back
wasn't
catalogue?
a thing. I didn't get put on a billboard for that. That was a Baku tweet that went out.
So no Bottas ad for Parma.
No, Bottas is the meme lord now, isn't he? I had to do a couple of. So when I went to Australia, everyone loves to do Australian activations because why not? We had to bring in Renault for the first race back. We surfed in a Formula One car on the beach in Sydney, which was an odd way to start my career as well. And then I did in Mexico. Did some piñata smashing with a Renault car, and it might have been an Infiniti actually, with a load of mariachis in the back, mariachi band. It was lovely. Went straight from that to a bit of samba dancing. We had all sorts of weird stuff at Renault. But the thing is with it, because Renault weren't very competitive, They were trying to make themselves fun and like that. And I do feel like there's some similarities with Valtteri Bottas right now. He's very fun. It's great to see. But I think he's turned to that side of his game now because he's embracing this Australianness. And so my sister married a Scot. She now thinks that she is Scottish. And she thinks, Burns night and everything's Scottish. And I think Bottas has done the same thing. I don't get it. I think she remains English. He is a Finn, but loves Australian culture. So good on him.
Have we actually said that he's dating an Australian woman, Tiffany Cromwell, the cyclist? Yeah, that's why he thinks he's Australian. Julian, please tell me there is a video somewhere of you samba dancing.
Yeah, there is. I got moves. Me and Kevin Magnussen, the rhythm is unbelievable.
Oh, I hope 5 Live put that out on social.
Everyone's suddenly Googling Jolyon Palmer, samba.
You can learn a thing or two from that.
We can all learn a thing or two, Jolyon Palmer, from you. That's it. Any thoughts ahead of this weekend? Anything you want to get off your chest, Harry?
No, I think Verstappen's going to win.
Breaking news.
And I think it'll be fun in the midfield.
Fun in a Bottas kind of way. Jolyon?
I think Melbourne's a great racetrack. It was all right with some average racing, but now they've taken out that chicane. I think it's a really good racetrack, loads of DRS. It's a circuit that punishes you for mistakes. You can get beached in a gravel trap, which I love to see. And so I'm looking forward to just a good race, hopefully.
Beck?
It's one of those races that I think it didn't used to be. Now it is worth getting up at 4 a.m. to watch it. It will throw up a few surprises lower down the field. I agree, Verstappen will end up winning. But you won't watch that anyway because I can't imagine the sponsor's too happy. He's never on camera. But you can watch the rest of the midfield cause carnage. And
listen to them, of course, with a bacon butty and a cup of tea, which is, in my view, the only way that you can watch the Australian Grand Prix. And it used to be the season opener, didn't it? You started everything off with a big cup of tea and a bacon sandwich. So we'll see you for all the action because we are obviously covering it all. My thanks to our guests, Beck Clancy, Jolyon Palmer and Harry Benjamin. You can listen to every session from the Australian Grand Prix across the BBC Radio 5 Live network. The race is on Sunday morning, bright and early, with build-up from 3:45, lights out at 4 a.m. You've been listening to an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live. Up next, Ben Haynes and Ellen White discuss all things women's football in the Women's Football Weekly. That's after the latest BBC news.